So nice you could join us, Mr. Scott Kennedy.
Resident Evil 4 is considered to be a masterpiece. I mean, even Capcom knows it's a massive hit. Look at how many ports it's got. Now I know it's been beaten to death about how amazing it is, and how it redefined the series, but come on mate, your boy's got an opinion or two worth listening to. Judging by the rate at which Capcom is remaking or reimagining the franchise, it's a safe assumption that they just might remake Resident Evil 4, which began development back in 1999 under the direction of Hideki Kamiya. At least 4 versions were scrapped to actually begin development in 2001 under Shinji Mikami. One of them became Devil May Cry. It went through a couple more iterations, and one of them even was named The Phantom Biohazard. The Japanese do like their quirky titles, don't they? Anyway, it was stuck in development hell for years, which made the wait for a Resident Evil game much anticipated, which forced the developers to reinvent the series and innovate rather than make a 3.5 or just use the same design principles and assets to tell a new story. Reimagining the old tank controls and static cameras of a Resident Evil 1, 2, 3 makes sense, as they provide a new perspective and lets a new generation of players experience the classics. But as we saw before, the troubled development was part of Resident Evil 4, which wasn't necessarily a good thing, but it made the franchise evolve for the better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Shinji Mikami was unwilling to use the same formula as Resident Evil 2, and so decided to make the game more action-focused with boss battles and heaps of aggressive new enemies like the Ganados. They can dodge headshots, have shields, throw axes, and even lock grenades. Some of them even mount machine guns, and how they do that is beyond me. Leon, on the other hand, is much more competent as he can kick, knife, precisely shoot enemy limbs to knock them over or disarm them, but he can't shoot and move at the same time, creating the tension of fight or flight, where you either narrowly escape being chainsawed by this dude, or kick and suplex most of the enemies. Level design is much more straightforward and linear, with emphasis on combat rather than, say, survival. Enemies regularly drop ammo and health rather than use scrounging for supplies. Having more enemies on screen and restrained mobility can be overwhelming, but it sustains the horror elements with you having to manage and use resources wisely even though you have a shotgun and a grenade launcher. The gameplay elements are a potent mix where fear and the sense of exhilaration coincide. That is the X factor of Resident Evil 4. So if Resident Evil 2 was Alien, Resident Evil 4 feels more like Aliens. Another reason why a remake would be obsolete is the fact that the game is so campy.
See you later.
Dialogues are cheesy, and most of the elements that make the game what it is are rather gamey. So Resident Evil 4 has an adaptive difficulty setting which sets the difficulty based on the player input. So if you've been playing well, it will up the number of enemies, or they just might rush you faster than they normally would. If you're stuck and die a couple of times, the game will ease up and give you some breathing room in terms of enemy encounters. This was part of what made Resident Evil 4 great, not knowing how the game treated you and made the experience more challenging when it needed to be, so it never felt like a cakewalk or being so hard that the enemies felt like bullet sponges. With the cat out of the bag, a remake would just make it pointless. So RE2 and 3 had fixed static cameras and angles due to the limitations of the PlayStation 1 hardware. Remaking them with better graphics and improved gameplay makes sense artistically, as they'd get to redo the game that they really wanted to make back in the day but couldn't. It also lets the new players experience the old games without feeling dated, but it does make the new ones the de facto way to play, leaving the old games in the shelf. Resident Evil 4 was a sequel that came out 6 years later, much like the recent God of War, and it pretty much created a new over-the-shoulder third-person shooter genre for the most part of PS3 and Xbox 360 generation. One of the reasons it was third-person in the first place was to add more player interactivity, with strong gameplay and show characters with believable facial animations, where they'd act and exhibit feelings in a given situation. Like Ashley would hunker down in fear when you point a gun at her, or Ganado will alert other enemies in the vicinity when Leon is in line of sight. Enemies act more intelligently as they open doors, call for backup, albeit with a growl, which made it more interesting and fun to handle enemies in herds, but also induces fear compared to the shuffling zombies from the previous games. which proves that a newer, fresh take on the franchise can still work than just remaking the old ones one by one. It took risks for the franchise and it was a massive hit, but it essentially killed the franchise until RE7 went back to its horror roots with first-person and smaller tense environments. So here's me hoping Capcom will make the franchise in ways that are unexpected rather than retread the old ones that we loved and played for years. Hey, thanks for watching, subscribe if you want to support my channel, and like the video if you did. Cheer.